an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, chapters 12, 13, and 14. In these chapters, finally we get to see, well, kind of see, what the retribution will be for Lorkin healing somebody. I was very curious about how this was going to be handled. And also, it does not seem that Lilia is getting the fucking picture yet. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Sorry, I'm moving my mic here. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning these episodes. Welcome to Martin, who is right now in the chat. So these chapters are a little bit focused on like the overall consequences of a few things. And we all know that I am absolutely here for that. Chapter 12 begins with Lorkin going to Tyvara to ask her what he should do regarding this girl who is super ill that he is considering healing. And it's a really interesting conversation, actually, because Tyvara goes through all of the potential ramifications of various choices that he could make. And I really appreciated this because I was also trying to think them through, but I wasn't exactly sure how harsh people would be, how like heartless Kalia will be. Overall, it seems that Tyvara has a much harsher opinion of what Kalia's actions will be in response to Lorkin doing anything. Literally, like, Lorkin is kind of fucked no matter what. So what he has to do is decide which type of fucked is best for him in the end. And I'm going to just read some portions of this. So he comes to her, tells her, you know, there's somebody who's going to die if I don't heal them. I know that there will be consequences to doing this, but I would like for you to walk me through what you think the consequences will be and whether or not I can make it at all easier on myself. And she says, Savara thought you would refuse to heal them. Zarala said you wouldn't, but you'd wait to be asked. And he says, should I wait? Is Kalia ruthless enough to let the girl die? And Tyvara says, she might be. Her excuse will be that you made it clear healing wasn't something you were willing to give, and she was respecting your decision by not pestering you. People will have to decide if it was worse that she did not ask you or that you did not offer, and they will probably favor her. You haven't used your healing powers before and have not indicated that you would do anything but refuse if asked to. And he asks, if I do heal, though, will people see this as me flaunting my ability in your faces because I haven't offered to teach this to anybody else? And she's like, I mean, probably, to be honest. But I think people will forgive that if you have chosen to heal somebody. It's like there's going to be, no matter what, a little bit of murmuring in response to this because it's dealing exactly with the issue that got you here in the first place. So then he says, and this was like my main question, where do you draw the line then? If I'm healing people for this, where, like, how far do I have to let things go the next time somebody gets ill? How much do they have to suffer before I finally feel like I've reached a point where there is adequate cause for me to break the rules or defy Kalia or whatever? And the truth is there isn't a good answer to that. He's just going to have to kind of decide on a case-by-case basis. And she says that, people will all have different opinions. There's a lot of people who support Kalia no matter what, but there are also a lot of people who don't like her. And you doing something that maybe kind of undermines her position will be looked on favorably by certain people who already feel like she's overreaching all the time. And she says, make sure you get the patient's or parent's permission before you do anything. And he says, should I ask Kalia? And she says, yeah, okay, so this is the really tricky part. Zarala was most concerned about this. If you ask Kalia, she will forbid you to use magic to heal anyone, insisting that you teach her how to instead. Then, if the patient dies, it is still your fault for refusing. If you do not ask her, you will not have respected her as your superior, and as a man that is especially bad. But if you save someone's life, people will forgive that disrespect, as many people dislike Kalia as support her. In your defense, point out that nobody here has to seek permission from Kalia before treating a sick or injured traitor. Patients choose to go to the care room. So, I thought this was really interesting, the back and forth here. And while I have known that Kalia is just kind of an unreasonable, selfish, power-hungry person, putting it in these terms just really changed the whole outlook for me. When you decide that you're willing to let children suffer and die to make a point, you've really crossed over from being somebody who understandably is very protective of their secrets and their community to being somebody who is heartless, ruthless, and power hungry. Like, that's a different situation. And it would be one thing if Kalia was, defying some community that had grown really oppressive and she was like, I still wouldn't agree with her, but letting somebody die for the, quote, greater good of taking down some sort of, for defying some sort of, like, I'm trying to think of the word I want, authority, I guess. While I would still think that this was not a good idea, I would sort of understand the mental gymnastics that would take you to that point. But Kalia is just like, she just has a very different idea of the direction the traders should go in with the way that they are ruled. And that's just, there's nothing really to that other than politics. It's purely politics. It doesn't really have anything to do with right and wrong. It's just her opinion on the way things are run. And I just have absolutely no patience for that. Those kinds of reasons are not adequate. And Kalia has kind of transitioned in this section, for me at least, from being an overbearing but partially understandable villain to genuinely like an outright villain and somebody that I have lost complete respect for. And anybody who does sort of follow her and support her, I'm really going to be looking on as they would also have been willing to let a child die. That's sort of where I'm at. Like, if Tyvara thinks that Kalia would have let a child die, then I don't really see that Tyvara has any particular insight into Kalia's personality that other people wouldn't have. So I'm assuming if Tyvara makes this assessment, other people would also make this assessment. And some of them apparently would be fine with that. Sorry, kids. No, I don't think so. We're not playing that game today. So he has a moment with Tyvara where she kind of like, in so many words, expresses a little bit of solidarity with him, a little bit of empathy for the position he's in and how difficult this is. And he considers kissing her for a second, but he's just like, no, this is not the time. I can't do this. So he has to leave and try and figure out exactly when he can get this little girl by herself so that he can heal her without Kalia seeing him and stopping him. And this winds up being sort of solved for him because he is expressly told by her not to go visit the girl in her rooms. Her parents have seen that she has taken a turn for the worse, and they decide that they are going to take her home because there's sort of this assumption, I believe, that the little girl is going to die, and they believe that it would be best for her to live her last moments in her own home. So it appears that they are taking her home, and in anticipation of that, Kalia tells him, don't go to her house, you're not allowed, I'm not giving you permission to do that. To which he says, okay, that sucks, but sure. And then as he is heading back to the men's quarters, he gets sidelined by Savara, who has the little girl and her parents with her, and she acts as a witness to the fact that these parents gave him permission to work on their child. And I really liked this scene, actually. It's been a while since we've seen an in-depth sort of description of what it's like to heal with magic. It's sort of surprising to me, considering that one of the other main characters is Sania, who works in a hospital, how long it's been since we have seen this sort of thing really described to us this way. But basically, he has to make it clear to the parents that, yes, I do have the magical means of healing her, but that is not a guarantee. And you still want to let her take medicine and stuff. Like, in particular, that is something that I appreciate about the way that magic works in this world, is that only so much can be done. And it's certainly better than not having magical healing, but it's not actually a cure-all. And regular healing is still applicable. It's still necessary. I like the fact that magic doesn't totally eclipse practical medicine, because that would mean that people who don't have magic, there's no point to them pursuing medicine. And that, I feel like neutering them in that way would be a bummer. So I like that there is still room for them, and that like a magician can set somebody's body on the course to be able to heal itself, but it still remains the body's responsibility to do what it has to do. And it's not always going to be able to do that. So he tells the parents, I can heal the damage that has been inflicted by this so far. I can remove the liquid from her lungs that she's having trouble breathing through. I can restore some energy to her body when she is exhausted and unable to sort of, heal herself because her body is just doesn't have the energy to do so. I can give her those tools, but I can't undo her having this virus, if that is indeed what it is. This is something that her body in the end has to fight itself. It has to cope with the virus on its own. So that's an interesting, I don't know. I just think that that's a nice compromise between magical healing that's a little bit too easy and magical healing that is, so minor that it feels like, well, why do we even have this then? So that is what he does. He does the healing as best he can. He tells this family that they have to continue to attend to the girl and hope for the best. He can't guarantee everything. And then he goes back to work and doesn't tell Kalia about what happened. He winds up being approached by Ivar, who is pretty, Ivar has a sore throat and is not feeling super good. And he comes in to get medicine from Lorkin while Kalia is not in, because he knows that she is going to give him a hard time if she sees him. And while Lorkin is helping him find what he needs in the storeroom, Kalia comes barging in. And it should be noted that the day before, or maybe earlier in the same day, an old woman died. And it seems to have kind of been an interesting choice, because Lorkin is so afraid that everybody, like when he finds out that this woman died, Lorkin is really sure that this is going to be a prime opportunity for Kalia to point the finger at him and be like, see, he could have saved her. He didn't. I was right. They're so selfish. They're willing to let us die rather than share. And she doesn't. And that sort of takes him by surprise. Everybody seems to sort of agree that this old woman probably wasn't going to make it. They all are rather unsurprised. But I can't help but wonder if that colors what happens later. Because Kalia comes into the storeroom and she sees Lorkin and Ivar and sort of like barks at them. And she demands to know if Lorkin went and saw that child in her home and flouted her orders, basically. And he tells her no, that he didn't disobey her. That's not what happened. And she just sort of stands and stares at him for a second before like grunting and walking off. And by the end of the section, we still don't know exactly how she's choosing to handle that. I have not got a good sense of what follows now, because I really thought if she, I basically what I'm saying is I took Tyvara's assessment of Kalia at face value. When Tyvara said, I don't know, I think that Kalia might let her die in order to, make a point, I sort of just believed that Tyvara was making an accurate assessment of who Kalia is. But I'm realizing like there's no reason to necessarily do that. Tyvara doesn't like Kalia and she may think the worst of her, and that might not actually be entirely accurate. And I wonder if maybe after this old woman died, Kalia was reconsidering the way that she had been going to play the game. Maybe she had intended to sort of leave Lorkin hanging to, make a mistake in one direction or another. And then there was a death that, while inevitable, still got to her a little bit. And now she's not sure what to do. And so when she approaches Lorkin and he freely admits, oh yeah, I did that shit, she had been going to jump down his throat, and now she's like reconsidering whether that's the best course of action. And I would rather like that. I would prefer to not have a Kalia who is such a bad person. I would much prefer someone who is conflicted and intended to do a thing and then realized when it comes right down to it, they don't have the heart for it. But I don't know. It might, she may bring the hammer down on Lorkin somehow in another way. It's just, who can tell? So anyway, that is what I'm sort of sitting on there with Lorkin's story. And that is the end of his for now in this section. So then we go to Daniel. And Daniel is planning this. Oh, sorry, Martin's in the chat. Martin says, was the old woman who died that one who backed up Lorkin when Kalia tried to frame him for giving the child too many sweets? Oh, I don't know, Martin. I don't remember if that was mentioned. But if it was, that's intense. I think that Lorkin did mention that woman hadn't been in great shape, but I could be wrong on that. But short answer, I'm not sure. All right. So Daniel's situation, he's planning this trip to Duna with a Chadi. And apparently Daniel is intending to go without his assistant, which honestly did sort of surprise me a little bit. Maria, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but Maria has continued to be in contact with the women who had seemed at first to be very anti-traitor. And she's beginning to realize that that is a complete front and that they are if not traitors themselves, definitely sympathetic and are simply very vocal because they know that it kind of conceals the fact from everybody else. So Maria, when she finds out that Daniel's planning on leaving her behind, she finds out in front of Tyen. And Tyen makes some comment about how Daniel's really good at leaving people behind and how that's really par for the course for him. Daniel is just, I really like go back and forth on what I think of him. There are times when I root for him and I kind of get him. And then there are times where he does shit like this and it's just so petty. And we find out by the end of Daniel's section that Tyen has like wormed his way into the trip. And honestly, I found this a little bit hilarious because I had been low key when I thought that Daniel and Tyen were donezo. When I thought their relationship was over and done with, and it was just like a formality that they actually officially end it, I was very much rooting for Daniel to hook up with Achadi. But now, even though they talked about it and Daniel's like, so I guess we're not together anymore. Is that what I'm to understand? And Daniel said, no, I guess we're not. Honestly, the way that conversation went, despite the words that came out of their mouths, that conversation made me feel less like things are settled now. You know, like it feels like there is more doubt between them than there had been. And this whole thing with Tyen worming his way in, I have to imagine, is him trying to cock block Daniel. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Don't get me wrong. I might, but it feels that way. And I'm not that mad at him. Like, there's a part of me that is, because I am just a little bit interested in Achadi. But Daniel, in this section, he thinks for a while, and pretty convincingly, about all of the potential blowback that could happen if he gets involved with this guy. And honestly, he kind of got me thinking that maybe it isn't a great idea. You know, I was sort of feeling like, well, whatever, just have a good time, dude. But the more he went through in his mind what could happen and the people that he could offend, or the way, basically, shitting where you eat is a dangerous thing to do. You know, he's staying with this guy. Getting involved with him is a risk. It's like dating somebody that you work with and have to see every day at work. And as somebody who has done that and then split up with that person, having to go into work and see somebody that you just went through a breakup with is incredibly draining and awkward and tiring and terrible. So on the one hand, I still do have a little bit of curiosity about the whole thing. I'm not going to lie to y'all. Like, if he chose to hook up with Achadi, I wouldn't be mad at him for it. I would be like, all right, well, let's just see what happens. But when it's announced that Tyen is coming, and I know that Tyen is going to do what he can to get in the way, I found that a little bit amusing. I found it a little bit promising as well. If Tyen were genuinely done with Daniel, I don't think that he would object to this. So to me, I hadn't been particularly rooting for the two of them to work it out before, but that was because I sort of felt like Tyen was being an asshole and maybe didn't deserve Daniel. Now I've sort of turned around and I'm feeling like Daniel's being kind of an asshole. And if it turns out that Tyen is throwing himself into the situation because he would like to get another chance to fix things, I sympathize with that. I don't know if it'll work, but I appreciate the effort. And I am just very curious what it's going to look like with the three of them on the road. I mean, Daniel, if he weren't quite so conservative in the way that he sort of approaches things, I would say, why can't the three of them wind up in a relationship? But I sense Tyen would be up for that and Daniel would not. I don't know. Maybe Tyen wouldn't. He might be a little bit too possessive to be able to do that. But I think if anybody were going to be up for it, then he might. And Achadi doesn't seem like somebody who was intending to take things too seriously. I think, I mean, it's possible that Achadi was trying to set Daniel up and had a whole other agenda that I don't know about. But if we're just operating on the idea that he just wanted to fuck a cute guy, then I could see him being like, well, if you want to invite Tyen, I mean, he's also very attractive. That's fine. So when Daniel sits down, and I've basically gone through all of that, but I just wanted to talk about the immediate conversation between Daniel and Maria, because Maria has a bit of panic in her reaction to discovering that she's going to be left behind, understandably, because she's a woman. And she knows that they don't really like to talk to her. They don't like to deal with her because of that. And the fact that Daniel won't be there to sort of, mitigate the effects of being looked down on fills her with anxiety. Now, I sort of suspect that this is exactly what the fuck needs to happen. They are going to be put, and by they, I mean the Sachakans, they are going to be put into a situation in which Maria is, there is nobody to speak to except for her, and they are thus going to have to get used to dealing with her. I hope. It may not go that way, but I'm hopeful that is the result. I just really am worried about potentially her being in danger, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but even in her position, in terms of being an ambassador, she's an ambassador's assistant, but nevertheless, I would be concerned about potential assault, because women are viewed as objects in this universe, in this country. She doesn't have anybody in particular for protection anymore. Tyen isn't even going to be around, which had been what was going to sort of, I think, soften things. And she's genuinely going to be by herself. So I am hopeful that nothing goes wrong for her, and maybe being alone and having the contacts of these women who are apparently like traitor sympathizers will lead her down a certain path, and it will all wind up being rather helpful. We'll see. But I just definitely understood her reaction, the panic that she had when she heard. And I felt that Daniel's casual, dismissal of her concerns was so very... It just betrayed a real lack of understanding. It betrayed a real lack of compassion, in my opinion, to what she is enduring being a woman here. So he tells her that if there's something urgent, she will be able to contact Osen or Sania via one of the blood rings, and that he will leave one here for her. And he says, I have no doubt that if something comes up which seems unlikely, you'll be able to hold things together. Which, I guess, I don't know Maria at all. I'm hoping that Daniel's right about that for her sake. But I just wish that it felt like he had considered this. It just seems like he's already got this trip planned, and she doesn't even know at this point that she's not going. This should have been a conversation. He should have come to her and been like, hey, so we're looking at doing this thing and heading out of the country to some place that we have never been to interview some people that we are unfamiliar with their customs. We are not sure that you will be better off there than you are here. And for that reason, we don't necessarily think bringing you is going to be a good idea. And ease her into this situation. But instead he just goes to dinner and when she's like, I can't wait, he's like, oh, you're not coming. And I was like, dude, come on. You didn't think this through a little bit more than that? So then we go to the administrator's office at the guild, and Sania having to present the evidence that she found when she read Lilia and Nika's mind. It is Nika, right? Naki. I think I get that wrong every time. And there's a weird thing at the start where she's talking about how assessing who is standing and who is sitting sort of gives you an idea of the power structure of things. But I confess that I really had it backward. Her assertion is that if you are standing, that puts you in a position of power because you're sort of looming over everybody. I thought it was sort of like, on the bus where if you are older or if you have a disability, you get first choice of the seats. Basically, I interpreted this initially as anybody who is seated is particularly important. They are given seating. And if you don't have seating and you are forced to stand, that means that you are less important. And it turns out to not be true. And I found that a little bit surprising. So she has to tell them about the mind reading. And this is super upsetting to me. She shares the fact that the two of them do not have the same version of memories. And what I think Naki has actually done here is genius. She has apparently, and this is all conjecture on my part, but I am absolutely certain, she has managed to alter her memories so that they simply look like a slightly different perspective on the same situation as what Lilia was looking at. The way that Sania apparently interpreted them is she is making it seem like it was Lilia's idea to learn the magic from the book, that I was trying so hard to impress her that I got carried away doing this thing, which we know is actually what was going on with Lilia. She basically tries to take Lilia's place within the situation and turn it around and be the victim of this girl in a way that I think is going to wind up sort of blowing up in her face. Because what I think she's trying to suggest here is that Lilia was the pushy one. And I think anybody who knows Lilia, if they ever did like any sort of character reference, which it does not appear they are going to do, by the end of this section, Lilia's, the sentence has already been carried out. But I think there are a lot of people who are doubting Naki's version of events here. And the idea that Lilia would be the pushy one and that Naki would be interested in impressing her wouldn't hold water to a lot of the people in their social circles who know the two of them and know what that would have looked like. Also, I am beginning to wonder whether Naki actually did the thing that she was accused of with the servant, because we heard that story about how like she got caught with her servant, like she was like having a relationship with a servant girl, and then she like framed her so that she was fired. And I really trusted, because I was trying to like Naki, that likely her father did something hateful and she is being blamed for it. But as we get to know Naki a little bit better, I'm starting to be like, maybe not. Maybe she just uses people. And that was exactly what she was doing with the servants. Maybe she is a bit of a sociopath and knows how to be liked and charming and whatever, and does this all the time. And it is potentially possible. I don't know if Naki is genuinely attracted to women, or if she is targeting women to do these things for her, because she knows that if somebody is, like, if their sexuality falls outside of what is considered acceptable, they will be easier to manipulate. I mean, I feel like that is something that a person who is a manipulator would likely factor in. She might not be interested in girls actually, but she finds that that added element of secrecy and like that forbidden element makes her seem all the more attractive to the girls that she's trying to manipulate. And makes it so that the girls do not want to turn around and tell on her right away because they think that maybe there is still something there. I don't know. All I know is that reading about Lilia still trying to tell Naki, I didn't do it, I'm so sorry, when I am firmly of the opinion that Naki set her up and is a mastermind and a horrible person, is super, super painful to read. I hate it so much. Poor Lilia. Like, it's just so sad to see how she's so lonely, you know? She really seems to just not really have anybody on her side. She's got her family who don't, like, they're not really in her life at school. They come and see her later and just kind of ask her, how could you? So they apparently buy this whole thing, which that is particularly upsetting to me, is when people that you would think would know you better than that begin to believe the story somebody is telling about you. So for me, the fact that her family showed up and they were just like, I can't believe that you did this, rather than being like, I know that you aren't capable of this. What happened? How did you get set up? That bummed me the fuck out. Like, Lilia is kind of on a bit of a roller coaster here, because when she gives her testimony, the thing is that Naki has her whole story really ironed out. She's figured out how to show Sania what she wants to show her, how to make this whole thing sound plausible, even though Lilia seems a really unlikely murderer. She kind of makes this whole atmosphere of what they were doing feel like, if anything, that had more to do with what Lilia wound up, like how she wound up thinking that this was a good idea, rather than trying to make it that Lilia is like secretly some evil, terrible person. She sort of sets it up like, well, we were caught up in this thing. I might have said something that set her off. And in that way, leavens the accusation with enough benefit of the doubt to, in some ways, make it even more effective, you know? And I just, the fact that she manages to show Sania a different version of memories that supports the outright lies that she winds up telling later about who suggested what. And poor Lilia is so worked up that when she gives her testimony, she's getting things out of order. She's not responding to the question she was just asked because she remembers something else super important and sort of doubles back to talk about that. And they have to like be like, hey, why are you dodging the question? And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm trying to. Naki is much more prepared for what is going to be demanded of her and is ready to give what is expected because she has this all ironed out already. And Lilia is still operating under the fact that this is a terrible misunderstanding or something that I did when I wasn't aware of it. If she were coming at this from the idea of being set up, this would all go very differently. I have no doubt. But she doesn't seem to have even thought of that. Even later when the sentence is handed down, you know? And when they finally announce what they're going to do, basically, they tell Naki that she is going to be suspended for 3 years. So she won't be able to graduate as soon as she would otherwise, for her general involvement in the thing. But they hold Lilia more responsible because it seems like Naki didn't succeed in her attempt to learn the black magic, but Lilia did. Now, I found this a little bit confusing, and I'm interested if you guys have an explanation here. But Sania says when she reads their minds that Naki says her attempt at using black magic did not succeed. But she also says, when I read Lilia's mind, I sensed power being taken from her. And apparently, Sania is just willing to take Naki at her word that she didn't succeed, even though there is a distinct memory in Lilia's mind of losing strength. And I don't really understand that. Naki has an obvious vested interest in pretending she didn't succeed. And I don't understand why they are absolutely willing to just take her at her word when Sania has this like memory that she was able to access. Martin says taking power is one thing, but black magic is keeping the magic in the long time, or in the long term. I assume you were. I mean, maybe, but I would appreciate if Sania voiced any doubt at all. You know, like, it's one thing to be like, well, she did take power. She says it didn't work, but we can't be sure of that. And she has plenty of reason to claim it didn't work. I would like if that thought seemed to have even crossed her mind, but it doesn't seem to have crossed anybody's mind. And I find that extremely strange and not totally believable. We see that the punishment for Lilia is very different than the punishment that Naki gets just because Lilia succeeded. And all of the suspicion of the murder itself falls on Lilia just because she succeeded. So the idea that we're just going to take Naki's word for it, I guess it's supposed to be that Naki she presented false memories in her mind reading. And I am really wondering how, I'm assuming that it was something in her father's collection that she realized she could use to falsely report, within her mind. I am extremely curious to see if that's true or if it's something else that she has figured out how to do. I'm wondering if you are a sociopath or a psychopath, can you change what mind reading does for you? There are people who can lie so convincingly because they get themselves to believe the lie they're telling. And I am extremely, low-key enjoying the idea that if you have a sort of disconnect between your conscience and yourself, that maybe you could change the way your mind works in response to other people. Martin says, you mentioned last episode about the family ring that, quote, keeps secrets. True. And I guess that didn't come up in her memories either. Does that not come up in Lilia's memories? I would have loved, again, if that was something that Sania seemed to have noticed, but it doesn't seem like she did. So anyway, Lilia's sentence is to have her powers blocked for 10 years, and she will be sent to, quote, the lookout. I don't remember what the lookout is. Is that just at the border of Sachaka, or is that somewhere else? Martin says, I think that's something that the reader picks up on, but the characters don't. About the ring. Okay. I would like it if Sania seemed to notice that, but, again. The punishment, when it's announced what Lilia's sentence is, there's a lot of sort of jeering from the crowd. And her immediate assumption is that everybody thinks she should be executed. And she is really surprised when she hears people yelling out about favoritism. And it turns out that there's a lot of lowies in the crowd who feel that they are giving Naki a much more lenient sentence, not just because she didn't successfully carry out black magic, but also because she is from a wealthy, well-to-do family. And honestly, they are probably not entirely wrong about that. And as soon as Lilia starts to feel her spirits lift in response to people being on her side, somebody yells out, murderer. And she just kind of crumples up completely again. Martin says the lookout is the weather tower that works as the quasi-prison. Okay. So we have a brief scene with Lilia at the lookout. And it seems pretty comfortable, She's being kept in a cell that has furniture, and she's being brought meals that are better than what she was eating at school. They ask her if she needs anything, and she asks for books, and they agree to bring them. Honestly, this isn't a terrible situation in as much as compared to being in a dungeon. However, this is for 10 years, which is brutal. 10 years, And also, I want to mention that they talk about revisiting this and seeing if they can give her powers back at the end. I had thought blocking powers and then bringing them back again wasn't even real. I had thought that Sania was telling Larandra that they could do that as a carrot, but it was not a real carrot. And it turns out it is something that they can do. She could potentially give Larandra her powers back, which, that changes everything then. And because I was just really worried, thinking like, well, Sania's like promising her this thing that inevitably Larandra will figure out that Sania can't deliver on, and what will happen. And really, all I could think was like, who cares if she finds out? She's not going to be in any position to demand anything if she doesn't have magic. So, oh well. But now that I know that is something that Sania could potentially deliver on, I'm just kind of like, oh, that really changes the situation then. You know, she has an actual bargaining chip that I'm not entirely sure I want Larandra getting her magic back after everything that she has fucking done, apparently, you know? So we leave Lilia sitting there in her cell, contemplating the fact that the other prisoner is right next door to her and wondering what's going to become of her, but honestly having a pretty like good outlook on the situation. Her attitude seems to be somewhat philosophical. Just, it could be worse, you know? But knowing that her family didn't even believe she didn't do it, I was just like, man, that is just, I hate that for her so much. So let's see, who will I go to next? Oh, I didn't really talk about Sari. There is a moment with Sari and Sania where his daughter comes in, Anya. It's Anyi. And she has carried out her little deal with pretending to have betrayed him so that she could get into the inner circle of some other people. And she has some information. Sari is obviously extremely worried about her. Like, he's losing sleep over it, genuinely. And I love how he like sees a bruise on her and is like, what is that? What is that? Did somebody hit you? And she's just like, dude, yeah, somebody hit me. Guys, this is the job. What are you talking about? And she says that the guy that she's working for is named Rek. And she has been in charge of guarding his mistress. She seems to think that guard means servant, and I'm having some fun convincing her otherwise. I really would enjoy seeing that. I'm not going to lie. So she tells them Rek has been given tasks to do by Jemmy that were favors for Skellen. And this guy Jemmy is apparently also a thief. She says there's a delivery of Rowett happening in a few weeks. I can try to find out where. I don't know if Skellen will be there, though. And Dorian, who is involved in this whole thing now, says, but Skellen's men will be. And their idea is that they will basically swoop down on this shipment, mind read the guys involved, find out where Skellen is, and then, you know, go and fucking track the guy down. And apparently Sania and Callan have been given permission to mind read if they need to, which that's a significant advantage in this whole thing, that they're being trusted to, like, at their discretion, do that if they think it's necessary. But Sania rightfully points out, if we do drop in on these dudes and read all their minds, we will have given ourselves away completely. We will have given Anyi away, and we have no guarantee that they even know where Skellen is. That's a huge risk to take, to show our entire hand and not be sure they even have the answer. So Sari agrees with this, even though he really would like to have Anyi back. He's like, all right, we need a meeting that we know that he will attend. So go back, keep your ears and eyes open, figure out if there is one that you know he'll be at, and we'll deal with that. So they get interrupted here because people are noticing this. All these meetings take place in the hospital. And people are noticing how long this room is being attended and are kind of like, oh, what's going on in there? So they sort of break up, except Sari and Sania hang back for a second, and he asks her what she knows about Lorkin and what's happening with him. And she shares that she doesn't, have a lot more information, but she's going to be trying to pass a message along to him. And Dorian is pointing out later, like, how very worried, obviously, Sari is about his daughter, and sort of thinks about how he would feel if his daughters were the ones out there putting their lives on the line, and that he doesn't know that he would let them. And Sania has to be like, let them. Like, he really barely got a choice in the matter at all. Anya decided what the fuck she was going to do, and she's doing it. And Sari is kind of just aware that she's going to do it either way, so he may as well, like, try and make it work rather than keep fighting her. So I think that is everything in these sections. I feel like I must have missed something, but I have like 8 minutes left in my time here. So I'm like making sure that there isn't something that I sort of missed. There is a part I found sort of interesting with Lilia. She's thinking about Roet, and this, because I had said that I was worried about her developing an addiction, and wondering whether once it was like not available to her anymore, if she would suddenly realize that she had an addiction she hadn't even known was there yet. And it doesn't seem like that's what's going on, but she does feel a certain amount of longing for the cloudiness that Roet brings, because she would like some relief from her reality, to be honest. That seems to be like genuinely mostly how she's feeling. It's just, I don't really want to be here. I would like to not feel like this. And honestly, that is so understandable. I am somebody who, and I may have mentioned this in another show, but I am somebody who grew up surrounded by addicts. And it was just everywhere. My aunts and uncles, my parents. And thus, I grew up with a very healthy fear of drugs and alcohol, because I saw what it did to people. I saw how completely outside of their control their addictions grew to be. And it scared me. I'm not somebody who takes well to the idea of not being in control. So I went a very long time before I ever tried smoking weed, before I ever tried... I started, like... I had my first drink when I was a freshman in college, and I didn't have another drink until like the following year because I got so drunk and disgusted the first time. As for weed, I didn't even like try smoking until I was like 28, 29, and it did not work out for me. And I stayed away from it for a long time until I discovered edibles. And thus, I was somebody who just didn't really understand wanting to get drunk or get high, because every experience that I had really had wasn't super great. I always felt terrible after drinking, and it felt to me like just too much, like you were sacrificing too much for not a huge return. But then once I discovered edibles, and recently CBD, and with everything sort of escalating in the world and the way that things have gotten so incredibly tenuous, and the fact that it's actually beginning to genuinely affect my life, that has been something that I am growing to understand as like, I'll have a day where I've just read too much of the news and I like need to take a CBD to dull the edges a little bit. I need to have a cocktail to sort of just like chill myself out, because you get yourself to a point where you can't just take a deep breath and relax. That's not working. And I feel pretty lucky that I went so far in my life before reaching a point where I started to realize, oh my God, I need help. I can't actually like mentally get to a place where I am relaxed anymore. A lot of people encounter that a lot sooner in their lives. And that is part of why they turn to drugs, because their situations are so bad. But now that I am there and I have experienced that feeling of just like this agitation that's eating away at me, I definitely more understand this moment with Lilia and how she's just reflecting that, like, it's not that she needs the Roet. She's not like craving it. It's just that things are so bad for her right now that she would like a little bit of relief from reality. And relatable, girl. I totally get it. And it's a really tricky thing to manage if you are somebody who has like an addictive sort of personality, which I think I do. I have been keeping an eye on how much CBD I take and stuff to just make sure that I'm not like doing anything unhealthy. I'm not getting, and I wonder if there will be other like lasting consequences to that. And if so, will Sania find out about them? Because Sania is still puzzling over the effect that Roet has on people. And I wonder if Lilia will be able to give her any insights on that or what. Also, we don't get anything from Naki's perspective. And I have not got a good idea on what Naki's reaction was to her sentencing. Did she expect to get away clean? And is she like outraged at the fact that they saw fit to punish her at all? Is she delighted because she wasn't sure she'd get away with it and it's actually worked out extremely well for her? Is she trying to fight the judgment or what? She's the sole heir now of the estate, so she's got everything at her disposal, despite being like suspended for 3 years. I don't see that as necessarily a hardship, She's free to roam, so I understand. She isn't like on house arrest or anything. So she's got all this money and this amazing home and 3 years off. They tried to say like, well, we've got to make sure the sentence isn't just a vacation for her. I don't know that they accomplished that. It doesn't feel like a punishment to me. I don't even know if she is going to want to come back after 3 years. Like, I guess she's sort of required to if she's in Curelia, but she could go to a different country. She could leave and just decide, no, I don't think so. That shit isn't for me. And I want to know how many people suspect her. I want to know how many people have seen through her little facade and know that maybe she had something to do with it, and whether or not that is getting to her at all, or if she totally shrugs it off or what. So yeah, those are my questions remaining going into the next section. So I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again to Martin for coming and hanging out in the chat and asking questions and answering my questions. And thank you to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.